I wanted to talk this morning about loving kindness. I was thinking we talked about it before a long time ago. I don't know, but I thought it would be good to revisit it, maybe look into it a little more deeply. Actually was going to do this for Valentine's Day, but I didn't get my act together in time. But you'll recall that loving kindness, metta, and it comes from the Metta Sutta in the Pali Canon, is one of the four Brahma Viharas, which translates roughly into heavenly abodes that the Buddha taught. The other three being compassion, equanimity, and sympathetic joy. Sympathetic joy is taking pleasure in the success or good fortune of someone else. And often say that if we did nothing but practice the Brahma Viharas of loving kindness, compassion, equanimity, and a sympathetic joy, we'd be well along on the path. And they're really antidotes for the poisons of greed, hatred, and delusion. They're really a way of really living a Dharma informed life. And typically, with loving kindness, with the practice, we direct it at all living creatures, including ourselves, in hopes that whomever we're directing it toward will experience a sense of being deeply cared for. The practice conveys our caring for others and it makes a place for them in our hearts. We call it a heart practice for that reason. It's not simply the reciting of certain phrases, which it is. It's an embodied practice where we really work to experience it in the body, particularly in the midsection, while we call it a heart practice. And it should be experienced emotionally. It should be felt, not just an intellectual exercise. We should sort of feel metaphorically our heart opening, and therein lies the power of it. And among other things, it's a wonderful antidote for the ego and for self-absorption because it takes us out of ourselves and directs us our caring toward others. That despite what we think, we cannot survive in this world without the love and support of others. Those that grow our food, stock our stores, build our roads, shovel our snow, whatever. So loving kindness is really another way of reminding us of the interconnectedness, or as Thich Nhat Hanh calls it, the inner being of all things, that we are connected to everyone and everything. And it's premised on the idea that we cannot be truly happy when others are suffering. So we offer loving kindness to those who are suffering, that our happiness is dependent on the happiness of those around us. The Buddha taught that holding on to this belief that we are separate and autonomous is a primary source of our suffering. The three poisons of greed, hatred, and delusion are part of this idea that we're separate and autonomous. The ego kicks in to protect us, tell us to selfishly hold on to what we possess, to protect our turf, and so forth. But when that happens, we exist in a constant state of sort of low grade anxiety, living inside these isolated castles that we build. And it's lonely, and it's contrary to this whole concept of loving kindness, which by definition is open hearted, it's generous, it's loving. So our relationships are founded on loving kindness rather than some transactional quality in which there's reciprocal self-interest. You do this for me, I'll do that for you. Loving kindness comes without expectations for reciprocity. We don't do it to get something back. We it's an antidote for the fear that we talked about on Wednesday. Um, the fear that the world is a hostile place full of people and things out to hurt us, fear that takes away our freedom and our joy. And not to say there's not evil in the world. I'm not suggesting that, or that we open ourselves up to harm or exploitation, but that we use our wisdom and we use our discernment to recognize malicious intent directed at us. We also use it to focus on opening our hearts in appropriate ways with loving kindness. Because if we live in a fear-based life, seeing the world only as dangerous and unkind, our hearts constrict, they close, and we shut ourselves off from others and we suffer. So loving kindness practice is particularly effective and lessening the judgment and hostility in our hearts toward those that are different, that we think are wrong, that are bad, or whatever. You know, it helps us to see or imagine the suffering that has led people to behave bad. And it doesn't mean we excuse such behaviors or fail to protect ourselves from it, but it lifts the burden of hatred off of us. It lifts it off of us so we don't have to carry that around. And over time, loving practice is another way of loosening the grip of our egos, taking us out of ourselves, as I said. You know, it makes no judgment about being better than others. It's a great leveler in that way. You know, it says we're all of humanity, all of creation is sort of pulling, you know, to try to achieve some modicum of safety and happiness. Because with the practice of loving kindness, we cultivate gratitude, we cultivate humility. As our hearts open with the practice, our tendency to judge lessens and our capacity for acceptance of others as they are increases. We cultivate loving kindness not to become something, but rather to free up that inherent part of who we are, which is open-hearted. When we strip away all the baggage, we experience greater joy, greater spaciousness, and less suffering. So what I want to do after our discussion for our practice today, I want to guide us in a loving kindness practice for those that aren't familiar with it or have not done it in a while. I'm just going to walk us through the steps of it, and I'll explain that when we get to the meditation. But I do want to actually do the practice today just to give everyone a refresher, or for those that haven't done it ever, to see sort of how it proceeds and how you can incorporate it into your own sitting practice or into your own larger practice. So we'll come back to it, but let me stop there and we will get your